Welcome up to the Vinyl Attic for a kind of special episode of Vinyl Fetish. We've been counting through 100 albums that matter, 100 albums that should be in your collection. And if you were watching last time, you know what was on deck for this episode was Black Sabbath's second album, Paranoid. And I was planning on recording it this weekend, this little discussion, and I got a little busy. And then I was going to do it today, and then I turned on the news and saw that Ozzy Osbourne has passed away, which is both shocking and not shocking. We knew that he was in failing health, but just 2 weeks ago he played a big farewell concert with the reformed members of Black Sabbath, and we were pretty sure that we had him with us for a while. So let's take a toast to the Prince of Darkness. We hope he's headed to a better place than this crazy planet. But I still want to talk about this album and why it matters. Not just Ozzy, but this particular album, which is their second album. Their first album comes out in February of 1970, and this one comes out later in the year, in September. And, in those days, 2 albums out in 1 year was not that unusual. But it is significant why there was pressure to put out a second Black Sabbath album. The 60s music that we think of the 60s, the sort of psychedelic sound really didn't last that long. It's 67 into 68, a little bit of 66. And, then it kind of got a little bit tired. The kind of psychedelia did not really hold up. And now we're in a new decade. And there were a bunch of people who were listening to the music about, going to San Francisco with the flowers in your hair. And we're thinking that, I can't do that. I mean, to be honest, a lot of that countercultural stuff was middle-class kids who were rejecting their parents in suburbia and going to San Francisco. But if I'm a working-class lad in Birmingham, England, that's not my music. That's not about my experience. So Black Sabbath emerges out of the drudgery of the industrial north of England, and the drudge becomes the sludge that is the Black Sabbath sound, and it sort of presents itself as a counter to the hippie music. Now, there were other, counter trends. We've talked about the Stooges. We're going to be talking about the Velvet Underground very soon, but this was one that was really resonated with the younger siblings of the baby boomers, who are the 60s generation. They needed something that was uniquely theirs. And the first Black Sabbath album found a wide audience, including in the United States. So 4 months after its release, they go back into the studio with the same producer, Roger Bain, who produced the first 3 Sabbath albums. And they don't really even have songs. They have bits and pieces of songs. They have basically jams they've been working on while they were touring for the first album, but a lot of this is written in the studio, and a classic example of that is the song which would become the lead-off single for this album, Paranoid, which is, really Tommy Iommi, the guitarist, just hitting a riff, and Ozzy bringing a melody to it, and then the rest of the band, Geezer and Bill Ward, kind of filling it in, and it just sort of takes off in the studio as a creation of these 4 incredibly talented people. In fact, one of the funny things about Paranoid, which was their one and only hit that they ever had, big record on Top 40 radio, was that Geezer Butler didn't want to release it because it sounded too much like Communication Breakdown from Led Zeppelin, who were their peers and inspirations. I mean, in 1970, there's not a lot of heavy music. You've basically got like the last gasp of Iron Butterfly. Iron Maiden is farther down the road. Iron Butterfly. You've got Grand Funk Railroad, a Deep Purple, And so Ozzy and Black Sabbath create this thing that is relatively unique. There's nothing like it. There's nothing with the down tunings and just this sort of heavy, slow. So the record has this darkness to it, as did the first record. I mean, you could refer. There was a lot of concern about Black Sabbath. In fact, 4 years later, there was a nurse who committed suicide listening to Black Sabbath, and people were saying, this is satanic music. It's not satanic, but it's satanic adjacent. Some of the themes here, and one of the good examples from this record is War Pigs, which is one of the great anti-war songs of all time. I mean, it's really like the metal version of Bob Dylan's Masters of War. It's cutting in its lyrics. Was, not really written under that title. It was written as Walpurga, which is sort of this saint who has been somewhat associated with pagan and satanic rituals, and so that was going to be the name of the song. And the record label said, no, that's too dark, that you've gone one step too far when you're bringing in some things that are kind of associated with satanic rituals. In fact, when they changed it to War Pigs, they were just going to call the album War Pigs instead of Paranoid, but since Paranoid was the lead single. But there's one song on this record, to me, that sums up the appeal of Black Sabbath, and that's track 4, which is Iron Man, which apparently was supposed to be called Iron Bloke when they first wrote it, which doesn't have the same appeal. And let me tell you, I was a 70s kid, and I wasn't into, like, the metal. I was a little too young. I was more into Sweet and Little Willie and stuff like that, the kind of glam rock and Kiss. But I had an older neighbor named Kenny Pope, who had a great stereo in his house, and I just remember sitting in my room, and it was directly facing his room, and I just heard, "I am Iron Man" one day, and I was like, "What's happening?" I was like 8 years old. I'm like, "What is that?" Dun, 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 dun. And I was just like, "Oh my God!" And it scared the shit out of me. I'm like, that's what the older teenagers who are all on drugs listen to. I was like, I can't listen to the Bay City Rollers, but I can't listen to that music yet. It's just too scary. But I was incredibly intrigued by the heaviness of that sound. And that's really, I think, the centerpiece of this record, Iron Man, because it's so heavy. It's kind of science fiction-y, a time traveler looking back at the apocalypse. I mean, it's all mystical, magical. And it's just the heaviest thing that you can imagine in 1970. Now, interspersed on this album are some things that are a little bit hippy-dippy-ish. I mean, there is, on the track Planet Caravan, there's a little bit of flute. I think Tommy plays the flute on that. And Rat Salad is kind of like this drum solo. And, so it's not all... I mean, one of the things that makes this record great and not just straight-up heavy metal is every song on it is completely different. Like, there's no two songs that sound alike. Judas Priest, a few years later, produced by the same guy, by the way, had like, this is the song. All these songs are sort of right in the pocket in the same way. There's incredible amounts of variation here. And one of the things that Ozzy was very clear about all the way to the end is that his biggest influence were the Beatles, that he really admired the Beatles and the variety of their music. So he brought this sort of darkness to the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour that became the Black Sabbath phenomena. I was a little bit late to it. I started getting into them, and then I finally got to see them, and I mentioned this before, in 1978, on a tour with the Ramones and Van Halen. That was quite a lineup. But it was Ozzy's last tour. He got kicked out of the band for all his drug problems, and he had certainly really gone off the rails. But in the early 1980s, brought that back, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be playing Crazy Train this week and talking about Ozzy biting the head off bats and snorting ants with a Coke straw and things like that. But this era of Black Sabbath is sort of the door open to what would become the heavy metal genre. It really kind of starts with the second Black Sabbath album, being somewhat musical, focusing on the importance of rhythm guitar as much as the guitar solos. I mean, that's one of Tommy Iommi's gift. They only had one guitarist in the band, but he's doing rhythm guitar power chords a lot more than he's shredding lead guitar, kind of Eddie Van Halen style. So there was this genre that was born with this record that is timeless. I mean, I came late. When I was in high school, the Stoners, I was kind of like the punk rock kid, and the Stoners listened to Zeppelin, and Rush, and Black Sabbath, because that was the music that the guys in the smoking lounge listened to. I wasn't into it. I was into the weirder new wave music. But I am certainly a devotee of Ozzy and the impact that he's made on rock and roll. So we celebrate him today. We celebrate him this week and forever. There will never be anybody like Ozzy Osbourne. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. But if you want to get Diary of a Madman and, celebrate 80s Ozzy in the Randy Rhoads era, go for it. That stuff is so awesome. But this If you want to take a trip to the dark side, oh my God, this will take you to a whole nother world, including a land where there's some fairies. The fairies wear boots. little bit of hippy dippy in there, but something completely different. Ozzy, 1970, Black Sabbath, Paranoid. What a record! What a record! So speaking of counter trends, next week we're going to talk about the Velvet Underground, and we're going to talk about not their first album, but their third album, the eponymous The Velvet Underground album, and why that is a door into also more genres to follow, and why the third Velvet Underground album is worth talking about. So we're going to do that next time, but for now, we're going to listen to a whole bunch of Black Sabbath, a whole bunch of Ozzy. Don't bite the head off any bats, leave the bats alone, but there's all kinds of ways that we can celebrate our memory of Ozzy, mainly by listening to this album very loud. Ozzy matters, Black Sabbath matters, Paranoid matters, you matter, so let's talk about it.